How can you give your kids a financial head start without spoiling them? Giving handouts is uncomfortable, but you know what? Past generations in Australia have gotten plenty of handouts. University was free in the 70s and 80s, and back then you could buy a home for 3 times your income. Now it's 12 to 15 times in a city like Sydney, where I live. Our children are entering the workforce in an AI-driven economy that will completely disrupt everything and are most likely going to have a much steeper hill to climb than even we did, and a lot more structural headwinds to face. And I hope that the government will step in with the right policies to ensure it is a level playing field for our kids. But as a strategist, I'm not just going to hope for this, I'm going to lead with a plan. And that's why investing for your kids is one of the most powerful things that you can do to ensure that they are set up for success. And a lot of these investment strategies doesn't just benefit your children, it really benefits you as well and your financial position. So in this episode, I am breaking down the Family Strategist approach and revealing exactly what we are doing for my own son. I'm going to break down the 6 most common investment strategies for kids with the unique pros and cons, everything from family trusts to education bonds, and why we ultimately decided on the investment bond as the smartest and most strategic move for our own family. But I'm also going to share my personal philosophy around inheritance and raising kids that are not entitled. I'm Christina Spark, former chartered accountant turned family strategist, and this is how we are engineering a legacy that builds wealth and not entitlement. Here's a quick disclaimer before we start the show. The information in this episode is for general educational and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute personal financial, legal, or tax advice. I am a former chartered accountant, but I'm not your accountant and not a licensed financial advisor. We're discussing strategies based on current Australian tax laws, which are subject to change. These strategies do not take into account your specific objectives, financial situation, or needs. Before making any financial decisions, you should consider the appropriateness of the information and seek independent advice from a qualified professional. All right, let's jump into the episode. When my son was born 2 years ago, my husband and I were both working professionals in Sydney at the time. We were high income earners, and we knew that we wanted to find the most optimal tax efficient way to save for our child's future. And the best gift that we had to give him was time. If we started early, we would benefit from compound interest, which is the compounding or snowball effect that investing has over a long period of time. We knew starting early in our case would be the difference of hundreds of thousands of dollars by the time our son graduates high school. That being said, though, it's never too late to get started. There's no time like the present, and perhaps you weren't in the position, either financially or capacity-wise, to be investing early. It's a great time to get started whenever you can. We spoke to our financial advisor as well as our tax advisor. Even though my husband and myself are both former chartered accountants with finance backgrounds, we always seek that independent advice. And I really recommend families do the same to go through your unique situation and your goals. But ultimately, we discussed a variety of options and landed on the investment bond. The main 4 that we looked at was, number 1, investing in our child's name. Number 2, investing in our name and eventually transfer that money. Number 3, a family trust. And number 4, an investment bond. At the end, I'm also going to talk about an education bond and investing in a super as more niche ways to invest for your kids that might make more sense for you. So let me tell you, number 1 was quickly discredited when we found out that the ATO sets up punitive tax rates to specifically deter parents from investing in their child's name. And the reason is because the ATO does not want rich parents to just get away with not paying taxes by putting it in their kid's name who earn no income and are therefore in a lower tax bracket. So a child that earns anything over $417 in income a year is taxed at 66%, which is crazy high. And anything over about $1,300 is taxed at 45%. So this option, obviously not tax advantaged whatsoever. It's actually worse off. The second option we looked into is, could we just invest ourselves, keep doing what we're doing? We have our investments and then eventually just transfer that to our child. Ultimately, that does not create any benefit, because when you transfer your assets into your child's name, that triggers a tax event. So we would be hit with capital gains tax. Now we would be benefiting from the 50% discount that you get holding on to assets for more than a year, but you'd still have to pay tax. So really that second option is not tax advantaged at all. The third option is a family trust, but we found it to be unnecessarily complex and costly for what we were looking for. A family trust is several $1,000s to set up. It is high administrative costs and time. You have to file your own tax return. You have to get lawyers involved. A trust is essentially a separate entity that owns your assets, moves its ownership from you into the trust itself. A family trust is going to be more beneficial if you have multi-generational wealth, multiple beneficiaries with a more complex setup. The fourth option is an investment bond, and this is what we decided to go with. And so let me break that down, what it is and why we felt it was superior to the other options. So an investment bond, also called an insurance bond, is a tax-effective investing structure. The bond itself is taxed at an internal tax rate of 30%. And the real magic happens when you hold on to the bond for 10 years. At that time, the income is distributed to you completely tax-free. You don't have to pay any more tax because you already paid 30%. It's kind of like a managed fund in that there is a menu of different investments within the investment bond, things like shares, property, ETFs, etc. But the bond provider is responsible for paying that 30% tax. So you don't have to do any tax returns. You don't have to add it to your taxable income every year. It's like a black box that you don't have to touch or worry about making you money. In terms of how much you can contribute, it's really up to you. You can contribute as little as $1,000 a year. You can either do that annually or every month. It does depend a little bit on who you end up going with and the specific product you choose. We went with Gen Life. There is one rule that you cannot ever contribute more than 125% of whatever you contributed in the previous year. So let's say you decided to contribute $10,000 over the span of a year. The following year, you cannot contribute anything more than $12,500. That is just to keep that 10-year clock running. The moment you over contribute, you restart the 10-year clock. The intention is to hold on to this for 10 years. If you do try to withdraw less than 10 years, you are going to trigger a tax event. So here are some of the reasons why we really liked it. Number one, it is so tax effective. If you're a high income earner in the 45% bracket, 37% bracket, 30% sounds pretty good. That is a flat rate. And the reality is that 30% is the maximum tax that you pay, but the effective tax rate you end up paying is likely to be less. It's usually between 15 to 22%. And the reason is because the investment bond is able to take advantage of two things: franking credits as well as offsets. So I'll explain what that is at a high level, but if it goes over your head, don't worry, it doesn't matter. So franking credits, what does that mean? So within the bond itself, you might have companies that are distributing dividends that the bond is earning as dividend income. Now, those big companies have already paid their 30% corporate tax rate. So it would be unfair for you to have to pay another 30% on top of that. So the company issues dividends along with what's known as a franking credit, which is kind of like a little voucher that you get to keep. The other is offsets. So the bond almost operates like its own corporate entity. These investment providers are holding lots and lots of investments that have to pay management fees, insurance costs. They incur capital losses across their portfolio. And what they're able to do is use those losses and offset your investment against any of the investments that they have incurred losses for. So between those two advantages, your tax rate is going to be probably less than 30%. So if you're a high income earner, that's really advantageous. The next benefit is just how simple it is. The administrative effort is low, which is great for busy parents. You don't have to file a tax return every year. The investment bond provider is responsible for paying tax. It doesn't get added to your tax return. You don't have to do anything. It's truly a set and forget product. You don't have to worry about it for 10 years other than making contributions. So unlike, for example, a family trust, that is very high administrative burden. You have to do a tax return every year. If you want to make any changes, you have to talk to your lawyers about it. So it's just so much less complex. Cost to set up, relatively low. I think we paid $1,000 to set up our investment bond, but that didn't just cover the bond. It covered a few other things that we were doing at the time. I'd probably buffer a few $100s to set it up. In contrast to a family trust that costs up to $5,000 to set up, it's pretty inexpensive. The next huge benefit is control. And this is important for when the time comes to actually transfer the funds to your child. And this is what's very unique about this compared to some of the other offerings. So the great thing about it is that technically at the end of 10 years, you can choose to give it to your child Or you can decide not to. You can actually just keep it and you still get all the tax benefits. You can actually use it for your own retirement, withdraw it and use that money. It's still tax-free. You can use it for whatever you want. You can change the date. Let's say you're planning to give it to them when they're 18. They are not demonstrating the financial maturity. You want to push that back another 10 years or 5 years. You can do that. It's super flexible. The asset is yours. There's nothing legally that requires you to pass it on. Unlike a family trust, that is a separate legal entity. And if you state that the beneficiary of your trust is your child upon its vesting date, then legally it is your child's and they can claim it and it's theirs. So that is a lot less control, a lot less flexibility, which is why, again, the investment bond won out for us. The next is asset protection. So because it is separate from your own finances, typically that means it is protected against creditors in the event of bankruptcy. If creditors were ever to come after your assets, most likely that would be quite protected. And that is also a benefit of a family trust, by the way. And that is different than if you were just investing yourself in your own name. Creditors could obviously come after that. You don't get that asset protection. So let's talk about some of the downsides of the investment bond. If you have a tax rate 30% or less, then this is not really advantageous because the main benefit is, of course, that you benefit from the lower tax rate. If you're already paying 30%, which is a threshold for less than $135,000 in annual income, then this is not really going to benefit you. And that's because you're going to lose your capital gains tax discount. So in that case, it probably makes more sense for you to invest in your own name and pay your own normal capital gains tax in the event that you transfer that wealth to your child. So this is a bit of a decision tree moment. If you are earning less than $135,000 a year, then that's where it gets a little bit hairy and you should figure out how much you would pay in tax using capital gains discount versus just paying a flat 30%. And most likely it's probably not worth your time. It is higher fee as well. Like it's lower fee than something like a trust, but it is higher fee than if you're just to invest yourself, do an ETF. Those fees are extremely low. The other downside is that let's say you take a gap year, if you're a parent and you have another child and you take maternity leave or paternity leave and you earn less income, you still are on the hook for paying that 30% when maybe otherwise that year you would have paid very little tax. So you are locked in to a certain extent over that 10 years and you have to pay that 30% regardless. And then the last downside is if you're in a situation where you need more flexibility with cash flow in year 4, if you have an emergency and you really need to withdraw it, then perhaps it's not worth the effort to set it up. You wouldn't be worse off. It would just negate the whole strategy because you'd just be paying the same amount of tax that you would have if you just invested it yourself. You should be in a situation where you're confident you don't have to withdraw that for at least 10 years. The other thing that is important to keep in mind with the investment bond, if you're in the situation where you have one person who's a high income earner and one person who is a lower income earner, it is always better for the higher income earner to make those contributions. To summarize, the investment bond is very beneficial for people who can hold on to it for at least 10 years and who are high income earners. That is when you're going to get the maximum benefit of the investment bond. A family trust is going to be more beneficial if you have multi-generational wealth, multiple beneficiaries with a more complex financial setup. And investing in your own name is going to be most beneficial if you are not a high income earner, if you have a tax rate of 30% or less. Now, if you want to get started with the investment bond or any of the other options, truly the best place is probably starting with a Google search. For us, we already use Colonial First as one of our providers, and they do have the investment bond, which is powered by Gen Life. Australian Unity is another popular choice for the investment bond. They're a little bit more of a low-cost choice, and I think more simple if you're just looking for Vanguard ETFs. That could be a good one that you research as well. Let's talk about two more niche categories of investing for your kids. I'm still continuing to evaluate them. The first one is an education bond. This is quite interesting. It's similar to the investment bond, but you get to withdraw it and use it on education expenses and get a tax refund for the 30% that you paid. So you're paying zero tax on anything that is used for education. Here's where it gets a little bit complicated. Remember how I mentioned that minors are hit with this huge amount of punitive tax, the 66%. So the education bond is going to be in your child's name. And if you actually withdraw income while they are still a minor, then they would still be hit with those crazy high tax rates. So based on my research, the strategy to use here, if you want to use an education bond, let's say you're planning to send your child to private school. In primary school, you're better off just paying from your offset account, paying from your savings account. Do not even bother because you haven't benefited from any compound growth. When they're in high school, they're still going to be a minor. That is when you want to withdraw only the capital portion of what you put in. So none of the gains, but only just the amount that you've already put in. That's your money, and therefore it's not going to be taxed because you already paid tax on it when you put it in. Withdrawing the capital avoids paying any tax when they're in high school. When they're over 18, that is when it's beneficial to withdraw some of the gains from the bond itself. And that is because over 18, they're going to fall into the normal adult tax bracket, which is going to be much lower than the child tax trap that I discussed earlier, which is that children are taxed at insanely high rates, 66% over $417 and 45% over $1,300. So you don't want to touch any of the gains until your child is over 18. Now, some of the downsides of the education bond is slightly higher management fees and costs to set it up because you do have to do those special rebates. You also have to provide evidence that you're using it for education. You have to be very smart and strategic with how you are withdrawing that money, ensuring that you are not withdrawing any gains early. Otherwise, you're going to be hit with a very high tax bill, and you have to be fairly certain that you want to spend quite a bit of money on education. The reason why I'm leaning against doing the education bond for us is because I'm not certain that I'm going to have an enormous amount of expense on education. At this time, do not plan to send my son to an expensive private school. I did a whole episode on why I'm choosing not to send my child to an expensive private school and instead investing that money instead. I'm not certain either that he will choose an expensive path in university. If he does a trade school, for example, that's less expensive. I'm not sure all of the administrative effort of tracking all your expenses, uniforms, textbooks, is actually worth the amount of time for the savings. This to me looks a little bit too high effort in contrast to the investment bond, which is extremely low effort and highly flexible. You can use that on anything. The next more niche option that is certainly worth considering is superannuation. So you can actually start investing in your child's super now. Every year you can contribute up to $15,000 for a lifetime maximum of $50,000, 50. The super's tax rate is only 15%, which is even more beneficial than the investment bond. Now, keep in mind, it's legally theirs, unlike the investment bond that's legally yours. And when they're 18 years old, they can actually withdraw it and use it to buy their first home as part of the First Home Super Saver scheme. If they don't use it to buy a home, well, that money is locked away until they're 60. They can use it for retirement. So this is quite beneficial because the super's tax rate is only 15%. $50,000 at that beneficial tax rate seemed like a really good idea. If you intend to help your child buy their first home, why not get that tax advantage? When they do withdraw the $50,000 to buy their first home, they don't just get the 50 grand, they also get the associated earnings. Now, the government sets what that equates to. Currently, it's around 7%. So that is how much you get. You get 7% interest on your investment. So assume the market had a fantastic year and earned 20% in growth that year. You still can only withdraw the 7%. Conversely, if the market had a terrible year, then you still also get the 7%. But keep in mind, you can only withdraw what's physically there in the account. So if you don't have enough buffer in the actual account, then you still can't withdraw it. When you say 50 grand, it's really not that much money to buy a home in 20 years, let's be honest, especially in a place like Sydney, when you think of the deposit plus stamp duty, but it's the $50,000 plus the associated earnings. So that could grow to possibly $150,000, $200,000. Now that is quite a sizable amount of money that is really, really helpful to buy a home. There are a couple downsides to think through. The biggest one is that this money is truly locked away and it's in your child's name. You don't get that parental kill switch that I mentioned with an investment bond, which is that with the investment bond, that's your money. You can just change your mind and keep it for yourself, for your retirement, withdraw it and use it however you see fit at that time. This money is legally theirs and it has to be used on a house. Otherwise, they cannot access it until they're 60. The other downside to keep in mind is that Governments love changing policies, and 20 years from now, we don't know what this home saver scheme is going to look like. So perhaps there is some level of risk there that the government could change. So far, they have been trying to keep up with inflation and keep up with housing prices by increasing the contribution cap. But it is something else to keep in mind. It's hard to plan 20 years away, isn't it? So although there's less flexibility with this one, less control, it is actually more tax beneficial as long as you're certain you want to use those funds to help your child buy a house. Otherwise, they cannot access it until they're 60. We've covered a lot. To summarize my personal investment strategy for my own son, what makes the most sense is my husband and I first to max out our own supers. Both of us should be contributing the cap as well as carry forward contributions from previous years. So all of that money should be invested in your own super. You get the tax advantage for yourself right away. It's actually more important to set ourselves up for success, because the last thing that I would want is to pass a burden on to my child to have to financially take care of me. If any of you are in that situation where you have the obligation to care for your own parents, you know what that feels like. And that's the last thing I want for my son. So it's important for me to ensure that my finances are also in a healthy state. And keep in mind, if you're over 60, you can actually access that money to help them buy a house anyways. So maxing out your own super, getting yourself in the right position is going to be the first priority. After that, then I do think it makes sense to take advantage of the super for our son. In our situation, I do feel confident we are going to help them with their first home. And if not, I'm comfortable investing for their own retirement. That's going to give them such an enormous head start. The tax advantage at 15% just makes sense. I know the Australian Retirement Trust is a very popular choice. This is fairly easy and automated to do this online. And then for us, the investment bond is still a really smart move, and we're continuing to invest in that. We do have our own annual goal that we've set for our investment bond that we're going to keep contributing to as well. The higher income earner is going to be the one to contribute to that bond so we can take the maximum advantage of the 30% internal tax rate. Now, I think it's important to talk about the elephant in the room when we're talking about investing for your kids, which is the how. How are you planning to transfer that wealth? What is your philosophy on inheritance? I believe that growing up poor helped me build an incredible work ethic, and I want my son to have the same. So giving them a lump sum of money when they turn 18 or 21 is a bad idea unless you are planning to teach them and mentor them on the value of money. So it's so important to teach your kids the value of a dollar early. And this is going to look different. It has to be age appropriate depending on where your kids are at. So my child is 2. He's not going to get any of this. However, once they turn 3, research does show they understand value a lot better. So one way that you could do it is give your child 3 different jars. When they get birthday money or anything like that, you can explain this jar is for saving, and it would be good to put some of that money in this jar, and then you can save up for something bigger. Like, let's say you want that really nice flashy toy car. Well, you can continue to put money in this jar, and eventually you'll have enough to buy that. Here's another jar that you could use for spending. What do you want to spend money on? Okay, well, how much money do you have versus how much does something cost you? You can also introduce interest. If you save money in this jar, then I'm going to add an extra $1 for every $10 that you're able to save. And these are how you can help explain these concepts, interest and of saving and delayed gratification as they get older. I also think it's super important to tie any money back to work and chores and develop that work ethic. I believe they should absolutely be working for that money. And I would also love to do less chores. So associating a dollar value with different tasks around the house, like mowing the lawn or doing gardening or taking care of the cats, cleaning their litter boxes, All of these can have a dollar value associated with it, and then they will learn to work for that money. I also think that it would be great to get my child involved in actually a paid job or starting a business as early as possible. If they do it with you, they don't have to wait until they're 14 and 9 months. They can do it whenever. So one thing I did as a kid that I can't wait to do is pet sitting. I did it with my mom, and it was so much fun. As a huge animal lover, we used to do pet sitting and have different dogs and cats over holidays when their owners would go away, and we would look after them. And I was always responsible for walking the dogs and feeding them and brushing their hair and taking good care of them. And it was amazing. I got a percentage of those earnings. My own cat sitter comes around to my house. She comes with her parents. She's only 16 and in high school. And I'm paying her $20 to drop in and feed the cats when we're not home. Those are good ways to get them used to working for money, and how incredibly satisfying it is to have a job well done and to be compensated for it. I also am planning to make my son buy his friends presents for their birthday parties. Of course, I'm probably going to introduce some type of matching principle. I don't want to be that parent that shows up to a birthday party with a crappy $5 gift, but I think it actually makes your child think twice about getting something that is thoughtful in the budget and representative of the friendship. If it's your best friend, you're probably going to want to spend a little bit more money. And like being more thoughtful. What about a handmade card? I would rather get a handmade card. It means a lot more to me than something that I'm just going to throw in the bin. The other thing that I really love doing is taking my son to charity shops and op shops and having him pick out something, like giving him $5 and saying, you have $5 to spend in the charity shop. You don't have to have the shiny new thing that's at an expensive store. It's so important to teach conscious spending it at a place which is giving back to charity. It's so much more sustainable and better for our environment to reuse toys than to buy things brand new all the time. As he grows up, I can get him a lot more involved in family finances. If we're planning a holiday, let's talk about how much that holiday is going to cost. And let's, as a family, plan the types of activities that's within the budget and what we're willing to spend and where we want to stay. I don't think it's appropriate to tell your children necessarily how much money you make or how much you're saving for them. That's not something they need to know as a child, but I think it is important to get them involved in those family finance decisions and conversations. How much do you value swimming versus soccer? One is costing double the cost of the other. Do you value it twice as much? Do you want to do both? Just getting them a little bit more aware of how much things cost and what is the true value. One thing that I plan to do is introduce a matching system. So my grandmother actually did this for me, and it was great. For every scholarship that I earned in university, she would match that money. And I still had to work super hard. I had to get the grades and I had to do all the applications. And if I was successful in getting a scholarship, she would match that amount and I could use that for anything I wanted, which I would use typically for my housing or my food. And it was a great incentive program, I think, for me, is this concept of matching. And it allowed me to still work super hard because I was able to get so many scholarships and then get some matching money as well that pretty much paid for my whole university degree. Keep in mind, I went to school in Canada where it is heavily subsidized by the government. My tuition fees were less than $5,000 a term, and I always lived well below my means in really tiny, cramped apartments with a million housemates. So I was able to get that head start. I was able to graduate and get my first job, and I wasn't massively in the hole. Or for example, whatever you want to save up for a home, I am going to match that for you. So it encourages them to still save and invest, but every dollar just goes that much further. So it could be another creative way to pass on wealth to them and still ensure that they are doing the practice of saving, but being very generous with that matching philosophy. The other thing that I do think about is the world is about to change in ways that we still cannot even fathom with AI. It is going to disrupt our workforce tremendously by the time our children grow up. This, to be honest, makes me more comfortable with the principle of inheritance because I think times have changed, and the best way to actually prepare our children for adulthood is with a little bit of a nest egg and letting them not start from zero or from negative in the hole, which a lot of us had to do. I think it's really normal in our generation to be starting life from debt. And wouldn't it be such a gift to at least start from zero, at least let them have education and maybe a place to live, and then think about how much that would set them up for success in their life if they didn't have enormous rent bills and enormous debt repayments to be made. So I think that in an AI-driven economy, giving them that financial nest egg is actually going to be more beneficial than giving them an education. That is my prediction. We'll see if I'm right, but I do believe giving them a financial head start in life is going to be better than giving them a fancy private school education, for example. And I did a whole episode on looking at the benefits and costs of private school education. And instead, if you were to invest that money, basically what would set your child up better for life. So feel free to check out that episode. But these are some of the things that I think we have to think about as parents navigating completely different times. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Next week, we're going to be tackling more great financial strategies for parents. So I will catch you all next week. Thank you so much for listening.